Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is 8 ways you may be overspending on Salesforce. We're going to begin in just a minute. We're going to give everybody time to log in, hit that calendar invite to hit the link, update their Zoom like it always wants to do before you do something, etc. So again, give us about 1 minute and we will start the presentation. And again, thank you if you're just joining us. This is 8 ways you're overspending on Salesforce. Again, we're going to start the presentation in about 30 seconds. We're just going to give everyone a chance to log in, get seated, get comfortable, update the Zoom client, minimize the chat, whatever you've got to do. All right, with that, let's begin. This is 8 ways you are overspending on Salesforce. My name is Sean Donahue. I am the VP of Marketing at Miro Consulting. I have been a Salesforce admin for about 15 years now. Before that, I was an admin at other CRM systems. So this presentation is going to be brought to you with data that we've discovered, and things we found working with our clients on their Salesforce instances, and things that we have researched, things that we have had personal experience in for ourselves. We are Salesforce users ourselves. So by all means, I want to make sure everyone knows as I start this presentation, we like Salesforce. We are pro Salesforce. We're not telling you to dump it. We are just here to help you right size it and not waste any kind of money on your Salesforce install. And with that, I want to start with a perfect next slide. Perfect. Oh, let's start with who we are real quick. We're Miro Consulting. We are a leading global provider of software asset management and subscription management services for Oracle, Microsoft, IBM, Amazon Web Services, and of course, Salesforce. We help you specialize in license management, audit advisory, negotiation, tactics, support management, and cloud services. And of course, one of the biggest parts of that is saving on your services and not spending too much. So we're trying to get our clients maximum ROI on their subscriptions and software licenses, stay in compliance, and negotiate successful contracts with things like Salesforce. We have a no-risk performance guarantee, which no one else in our industry has, and that's very simple. We're going to save you more money than the cost of our fees. And we do that because we want you to feel comfortable. We don't want you to think there's any risk, and we are able to always hold to that. We wouldn't bring you on as a client if we could not. So that is who we are and why you are here talking to us about this. So let's talk about what we're going to go over today. We're going to talk about active users who aren't active at all. We're going to talk about unassigned user licenses, unused feature licenses, underactive users, over-licensed users, non-user usage fees, adoption and rollout errors, mistakes, things that happen there, failures of that. And finally, mistakes you might make at renewal. And these are all brought to you by things we have seen out in the wild. So these may apply to you, and they may not. You may be doing great. You may have everything under control, and you walk out of this webinar and say, "There's nothing I learned that was new." Hey, great! You're already doing a great job. Come on. All right. So let's bring up a perfect case scenario. We've seen this exact kind of thing happen. When teams are involved in a renewal, everybody's busy, and there's a miscommunication regarding what's an active user. So during the negotiation, Salesforce does a typical thing they'll do. They'll propose you go from as many licenses you have now to more licenses because Salesforce always believes in you. Salesforce always believes in your growth. Salesforce always thinks you're going to be a success. Salesforce always thinks you need more licenses. So they're going to say, look, you're using a lot of your licenses now. You barely have any left. You really should buy more. And your procurement department, who is running the negotiations, sends an email to IT and says, how many active users do we have? IT comes back and says, well, we have 950 active users. Now procurement sits there and says, oh, wow, we're almost out. We're using them up. Hey, that sounds like a great idea. We probably do need more licenses, and what, we'll get a bigger discount if we do? That sounds great. let's buy more licenses. Well, at the end of the day, procurement asked IT a very specific question, and IT gave a very specific correct answer. But what procurement doesn't quite realize, and IT may not either, is that in reality, in that situation, 400 odd of those active licenses at that organization were users who rarely, if ever, logged in. Some of them had never logged in. And when they did, they didn't do very much. So in reality, 400 of those licenses were active, but practically unused. And this unfortunate team went out and purchased more because they did this before they talked to us. And they didn't realize how to determine what is an active license, what is an active user. And it turns out we wanted to give you the official meaning of that. And there is no official Salesforce definition of an active user. Now, obviously, they refer to it all the time. And it could be just that Salesforce assumes you know what that means. And maybe they think that, whatever you think it means is what it means to you. So let's talk about what does an active user really mean? Well, it's simply at the end of the day, an active is a checkbox on a user's profile. It's something you manage and set up. You just check the box, they are active or not. At the very base of it, an active user can log into the system. They can also have ownership assigned to them for things like accounts, contacts, everything else under the sun. What's important to know there is you can be an inactive user and own something. Because let's say you were a past sales rep, you left the organization, we want to know who signed that deal 5 years ago. Well, of course, we want to keep that deal with that person's name on it, who originally assigned the deal. So make sure you make that distinction. You can own things without being active, but you can't newly become an owner of something if you have an inactive account. So that is what active means. But let's talk about what does active not mean? And this is what surprises people. Well, an active user may have never created or edited any records. They never imported a contact. They never entered an account. They never did so much as put a note on a contact. They did nothing. They're not using it as a CRM. You may have users that have active users that literally have not logged in years. And we all have, a lot of us have a couple of those, but you shouldn't have a ton of those because obviously you're not getting any value from a user who has not logged into the system in years. Literally, we've seen years. You may have active users who no longer work at your organization at all, and they could have left years ago. Again, we've seen it where the organization didn't have a process in place. They may have frozen it, so they did the smart thing and they made it so that user couldn't log in anymore, but they never unassigned the license. So again, they think they've got all these active users for people who aren't even their employees anymore. And finally, the most vexing one of all, the one that I think shocks people the most, you can have an active user who has literally never logged into the system once. Not one time. They never set a password. They never confirm their email. They can be in your system as an active user. And that, I think, really, really surprises people. You don't even need to confirm that you are. You don't even need to confirm that you exist to be an active user. Now, how would you end up with these active users who aren't really active? Well, you probably also have unused licenses. And you would have unused licenses because you bought too many. If you remember in our first example, they had 50 unused licenses. Now, having some unused licenses is not abnormal. Of course, many organizations will. Employee counts fluctuate a little bit. Projects come and go. It's not uncommon to have some, but you certainly don't want to have any. We have encountered organizations who have as high as 40, 50%. We've talked to organizations who are at 95% unused licenses because they never had a successful rollout. Purchased a huge purchase and then decided at the very last minute that they weren't going to do it. And they were trying to get out of it and they could not. So you probably have some, but you really want to make sure you don't have too many. And the way that relates to having active users who aren't active is that if you have unlicensed users, well, you don't need to go look at your active users and say, are they active or not? Can I steal a license from this user to give it to that user because this user's not using it? Well, if you've got unlicensed, you've got more than you need, you're not even looking. And those can be very, very costly. We're going to get to that later, the true cost of over purchasing and having unused licenses. And it's pretty much the most common way that we see, if not the most common way, is organizations that chased the big discount bought way more than they needed, overestimated how quickly they could get it out, how easily they could get it out. We're going to go into all that later. And at the end of the day, they have licenses they're not even using. So, and we have seen instances where organizations aren't using 50% of their licenses, and Salesforce proposes that the organization buy 50% more licenses. It's crazy, but they will put that contract in front of you and see if you sign it. And if you do, well, you can't blame them if you don't know what is being used or unused in your system. If you're wondering, do I have unused licenses? Your team may not even know where to look. So it's one of the things we can help you with if you are concerned. But otherwise, if you've got a smart team, I'm sure they could find it. And like I said, why would you have these? Mostly because you failed to roll out and adopt, and we're going to go into that in a slide later. Another reason is, like I said, Salesforce reps, they're going to want that deal to be as big as possible. Their sole interest is to grow the footprint in your organization as measured by dollar value. Now, sometimes it's not your fault. Like I said, we talked to many organizations in the middle of the pandemic who laid off half their workforce and said, I got all these Salesforce licenses I don't need because I don't have the people anymore. How do I get rid of them? And the answer is you don't. The answer is either you dramatically restructure your next contract or you move away from Salesforce. But there's no giving back licenses. There's no refunds on licenses halfway through your contract. It doesn't work. The only way to get out of your Salesforce bill is to go bankrupt. So I don't think that's an option that many of you are interested in, but that's why it's so important not to overpurchase, because once you do, there's no going back. And another great example we saw that really struck a tone that a lot of organizations don't realize. Let's say you're the legal team, you're the procurement team, you've got this big team of stakeholders at your organization. You went through the renewal, you bought exactly what you needed. Great, you did a great job. And then all of a sudden you find out a year later, you've got 20% more licenses than you purchased at your contract. And you say, how did this even happen? Wait a minute, I got my contract right here. I don't have 1,000 licenses. I only have 800 licenses. Where did this other 200 licenses come from? Nobody approved this purchase. Well, guess what? There's a system in the back of Salesforce now called Checkout. And Checkout allows users with the appropriate permissions to purchase a license all on their own. No approvals, no nothing. Yes, 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 I submit, click, boom, new license. Very convenient, but sometimes can lead to failures in process. Perfect example is we had an organization who, prior to the renewal, they were really short on licenses. So every time they had a new user come on board, their process was to go to checkout, buy a license, assign it to the new user, and they're good. Well, they did the renewal. They purchased a bunch more licenses, but they never changed their process. So the guy whose job it was didn't know about any of this. Nobody told him to do anything differently. He was a not my job kind of guy. So he continued buying licenses every time he set up a new user, leading to many, many extra licenses. They effectively purchased those licenses twice. So that's something you really want to keep in mind. If that scares you, look into turning off the checkout process. Your system admin will probably always be able to do it, but everyone else you could probably remove it from. So let's talk about that hidden cost of unused licenses. And this is really where I want to open up your eyes to the bigger discount can lead to the worse or the lesser outcome. And I want you to start thinking about licensing differently. I want you to think about your discount is not based on the amount of licenses you purchased, but on the amount of licenses you used. So like company A and company B had about the same situation here. They were both looking to buy somewhere to 500 to 1,000 licenses. They weren't sure, and this is very common. A lot of organizations aren't quite sure what are they going to need during the term of this contract. How much are they going to get rolled out? What's their future growth situation going to look like? So there's a lot of future predicting things here. So don't feel bad that you don't know exactly what your need is going to be. That's completely common. So organization A talked to their sales rep, and the sales rep said, hey, well, 500 to 1,000 users. Well, if you buy the full 1,000, I'll discount your purchase price of 50%. And just in case you're curious as what I'm talking about, which license costs $200, none of them, as far as I know, we're just using some basic numbers here to make the math work and just make it easy for you guys. So don't try to reverse engineer which product this is, because I intentionally made it not related to any specific license. So, like I said, the list price is $200. Company A, they get sweet talked into that big deal, and they think, yeah, we could use it. It's a possibility. It's in the high end. They're not completely out of the ballpark. So they're only paying $100 a license. They buy 1,000, they're paying $100,000 a month. Well, in reality, turns out they really needed more like 500 licenses. Different things. And we'll talk about why this scenario can happen very frequently. So this is what I want you to think about. Your discount is not based on what you buy, it's based on what you used. So if you got if you got a 50% discount and then you bought twice as many licenses as you needed, you got a 0% discount, right? I know it doesn't feel good to think about it that way when we overpurchase, and we all do, but that's how you have to think about it in terms of value. So your discount after utilization is 0. Whereas if you look at company B, they purchased the 500 licenses, they used all 500 licenses, their total price came out to $75,000 a month. So they saved a little bit, but you might look at that and say, well, for the flexibility, maybe I would have bought the 1,000 licenses too. Maybe I would have spent, if I ended up, if company B ended up needing 1,000 licenses, hey, that would have been a serious, lack of, they would have missed out on a big discount. But let me tell you, 9 out of 10 times, customers buy too much, not too little. And even when they do buy too little, the cost of buying a little more still doesn't add up to the price that they bought too much. But most people stop here, but there's more. And this is what I want you to think about. Think about the add-ons. So typical cost, if you say get support and shield, you're going to spend another 40% because that's how they're priced. So take a look at it now. Now, when you look at the price of support and shield, we see that as a $35,000 a month difference. So the poor guys over at company A, not only are they paying for licenses they aren't using, they're paying for support and security and God knows what else, sandboxes and you name it, to support licenses they're not using. And if you think Salesforce is going to discount you on support because you are licenses that aren't being used don't need support, no, they will not. So can't think of it just as the licensing price. Can't think of it as just as my discount. You got to think of it as after utilization. What is it? So that's what I mean by just some of the hidden costs. So let's talk about what an underactive user is. We kind of talked a little bit about this before. Like I said, they could have never logged in once. They could have logged in once to confirm their email. And I've seen this plenty of times where a user is created. Their first and only login date is a day or two after their creation, where they clicked that link, confirmed their email, entered their password, looked around and said, well, this is going to be great. And nobody ever saw them again. And that was the end of it. So you can have users who just did that. You could have users who logged in years ago. We find that all the time. Users just stop using the system. Nobody notices. They're still active users. They may only log in to change the password. We worked with an organization one time that was happy to report that they ran reports and they made sure that their users were logging in a minimum of 4 times a year. And they said, okay, that's good enough. Well, it turns out their password reset is exactly that. So what happened was they were measuring users who every 3 months would log in, change their password, log out, and they realized that was all they had to do to get management off their backs. You may have users who only log in occasionally to look at a report. And, there's nothing wrong with this. We all have these users, mostly executives, the type. And, the cost of their license isn't much. You may not have many of them, but what I want you to think about is maybe they don't need to log in at all. Maybe they would do better just getting getting an email with the information. Someone exports a report and sends it to them. If they're not looking at it often, and maybe they'd even benefit with some context. Maybe a lot of your users who don't have who don't really do anything, maybe they don't even really need a license at all. You could have users who you would expect to do things, to like edit data and like things like download contacts and enter campaign information. And they don't do any of that. They log in, they look around, they click a few buttons, maybe they look at a report, and they don't do anything, but you would have expected to. So, I mean, does that user really need a full license? We're going to talk about that in a second. And the other example I love here that I love to give is sales teams. Sales teams who really don't want you to know about their losses. So what they do is they do the whole sales process pretty much under the table. And then when they win, they enter the opportunity, they immediately close it as won. It goes into the forecast for revenue, and everybody's happy. And nobody's looking at this at the other end and saying, well, what value am I getting out of a CRM if my sales team is just entering things at the very last second? Well, because the sales team doesn't want to enter losses because they don't want you knowing about deals before they win or lose. Because if they lose, they can quickly sweep them under the table and they don't get yelled at by management for losing a deal. So they're kind of incentivized to do it. So look at that. Is your opportunity create and close dates, are they right next to each other? Well, that's a sign of underactive use. We have the opposite too. We have over-licensed users. As you can see, this gentleman is prepared for anything, and in fact, he is probably prepared for everything. He's prepared for too much. Now, I want to mention this is another huge way. So most users have what's called a standard user license. It gives them standard access. They can access things like contacts, accounts, opportunities, cases, et cetera, et cetera. Many users don't actually need to access all those objects. For example, some might just need to see contacts and accounts, and they don't need to actually see opportunities. Others may only need some sort of development access for like a custom app. They need to log in, see if the widget's appearing on the page where it's supposed to, click the widget button, widget does what it's supposed to do, great. Well, that guy doesn't need a full license. He doesn't need access to all the data in the system. So we find that a lot. We find development teams who have licenses they don't need. And finally, we find people who have unused features or add-on licenses. And these are not the same thing, and people very often mix them up. And I'm here to show you the difference and why one is important and one really isn't. So a feature license is more or less a permission set, is how to think of it. So the examples here are things like marketing user, flow user, knowledge user. Marketing user is the perfect example. So a marketing user, it enables the user to do things like create campaigns, to assign contacts to campaigns, to import contacts, and you pretty much get one of these for every user license. So it is completely common to have many, many, many feature licenses that are unassigned because you don't want the users having access to those permissions anyway. So your marketing team might be your only marketing users, your IT team might be your only flow users, maybe your legal team is your only knowledge or some sort of service team for something like that. But you get the idea. It's okay to have feature licenses that you got for free anyway, that you're not using. But if you paid for them, you are going to want to make sure they're assigned, or why did you pay for so many? So that's something you definitely want to look into. Take a look at your feature licenses in the back end, how many you're using, and say to yourself, oh, okay, does this actually make sense that I'm only using this many? So don't sweat it if you have certain unassigned feature licenses that you got for free anyway. Add-on licenses are different. So the question is, do you have add-on licenses that you're not using? Well, that's a problem because they all cost money. Or pretty much all of them cost money. So what are these examples? Things like CPQ, service location, Einstein, the lightning dialer, and many, many, many more. If you are wondering how many, Salesforce has a pretty easily Google add-on pricing list that is 50 pages odd long. So you can see it grows and grows and grows every year. I'm not going to get into every single one of them. The important point here is if you've got usage add-on licenses you're not using, you're wasting money. And it can be very difficult to actually determine how do I even measure the usage of this? Well, first off, if they're not assigned, well, you're not using them. But they can be deeper than that. And I'll use the lightning dialer as an example. Lightning dialer, if you're not familiar, it's a phone dialer system. It's a robo dialer that your sales team might use, your service team might use, something like that. So lightning dialer, you may have all those assigned permissions, right? Everybody, you look at it and say, no, we've got everybody assigned. Are you using it? Well, for the lightning dialer specifically, I'll let you know, you want to measure it by minutes. And you get a certain amount of minutes. Your sales team will use it minute by minute. And you may log in and find, hey, my sales team uses this thing 60 minutes a day. I thought they were using it for, 8 hours a day. What's going on? Or this user he's assigned to it, but he never logs in at all. So with all these add-on features, again, there's actual usage metrics you want to look at in addition to things just being assigned or owned. Again, check your Salesforce backend. It'll show you how many you have, how many you've used. So again, how do you avoid all this, right? What causes this? Well, I can tell you what causes it. Number one, lack of expertise in planning. You've got to remember that Salesforce is the best sales team in the world. You are going up against the best of the best. They have looked at 1 million deals. They have looked at 1 million other companies making deals. They have more information than anyone on the planet. So they are going to be better than you because they've done it many, many times. And if you are just a procurement person or a marketing person or an IT person who just hasn't done this before, don't let them dump it all on your shoulders. Go out, get expert help. We would love to be that expert help, but if not us get someone. But I will warn you this one thing. Salesforce rates its partners based on how many licenses they have, what's called under management. So anyone who's a Salesforce partner, I'm not saying they will, but they are incentivized to sell you as many licenses as possible. So I want you to keep that in mind. We are not a Salesforce partner because we have a company requirement policies where we very strict NDAs with our clients, and we don't believe Salesforce being a partner with Salesforce would be congruent with the amount of privacy we do with our clients. So that's why we're not specifically, but just because somebody else is or isn't, I'm not saying hold that against them. They overestimate your need. That is again the most common is you overestimate how much you're going to need, and then more importantly, the next things, how fast are you going to get that Salesforce instance ready to be used? How quickly are your customizations going to happen? Because that is one of the places we see rollouts stall badly. Organizations that thought they were going to customize the whole system in a month and roll it out in the second month took 6 months to customize it and then 6 more months to roll it out. So that is something you definitely want to think about. And a lot of the things that lead to that are migration challenges. They've got the data, it's in a different system. They underestimate not only how long it's going to take the system to be ready for the data, but how long is it going to take to actually push over there? And we see a lot of organizations just lay out the worst, most inefficient processes. And a lot of times it will absolutely turn your data into garbage if you're not careful. And that's the last thing you want to do is import bad data or corrupted data into your system. We've seen people mix up like the names and phone numbers on a list because somebody sorted wrong before they system and they imported completely wrong data, mixing up people's first names and last names. You wouldn't believe what can happen there. Challenges with training are one of the huge ones. Everybody gets the system ready. They give sales training. Sales doesn't do anything, or service doesn't do anything, and they come back and say, we don't understand how to use it. That we didn't get enough training. I don't know what I'm supposed to do in this situation. I thought he was supposed to do something. No, that happens all the time. So Salesforce has programs that do training, but a lot of times we find that it's not how to use Salesforce that's the problem. Salesforce is very good at teaching how to use itself. However, it is what you want your specific team to do and accomplish with Salesforce and how you want them to do it. Those are the training challenges. And a lot of times we hear from, because we talk to salespeople too. We don't just talk to the people who are building design. We talk to users. And they say, I use my Salesforce as little as possible because it's tedious and I need to spend my time selling. And a lot of times they're right. I look at some of the processes and they're terrible. They're absolutely terrible. And this guy has no chance of making his sales numbers if he's going to do it the way the company wants. He's forced to either ignore or cheat or half-ass his Salesforce usage. So don't think it's that end user's fault, because many times it's not. And the other part is just lack of buy-in. If you are, typical example would be like a sales director who says, I think Salesforce is going to be great for my organization. I want to roll it out. And then he kind of doesn't, he talks to IT. They don't really want to help him. He talks to marketing. They don't have bandwidth to support him. So he just goes off and does it on his own. Total recipe for failure, because those kinds of teams are not ready to design these systems. They don't know what they want. They don't know what they should do and what they shouldn't do. And often they replicate bad practices they thought that Salesforce was going to fix for them. And as you can see here, you really should be planning both new purchases and renewals. So let's talk about renewal mistakes. We have a few minutes left here. I'll try to finish up as fast as I can. What are the most common mistakes you're going to make at your renewal time? Number one, by far and away, you're waiting too long to start. You should be starting at least 1 year before your renewal date is up. You should start. And hell, we've seen clients who didn't realize they had to tell Salesforce that they weren't renewing 30 days before the renewal date. So if you didn't know about that one, that's one definitely you should know about. But 1 year, we recommend 1 year, and we're dead serious. It takes that long to do a proper job because it's a lot of back and forth. You and your team, offers from Salesforce, and the longer you prepare, the more seriously Salesforce takes you. And I'll tell you that's flat out. One thing they absolutely underestimate is the cost of an uplift. An uplift by your new renewal price. So a lot of companies, they do that first year purchase, 3 to 5 years, they get a big sexy discount, and they think, okay, my rates are going to go up maybe 5%, 6%. I think my contract said 7%. Did it really? Or did you read that somewhere? Because it's not in contracts anymore. They used to put it, but it's not. And all of a sudden, renewal time comes around and your bill goes up 25%. And you call your rep and say, what is going on here? And your rep says, well, you got preferential pricing because you were a new customer. Now we've got to bring you back in line to normal pricing. So just because Salesforce says, our normal, rate is a 7% or 10% this year, that may not be your rate, especially if you are renewing for the first time. Next big problem is you're not measuring what you're actually using. And that is at the high level, assigned versus unassigned licenses. At lower than that is users who are really active or not active. And then are they actually using different pieces, the add-ons and everything else? You want to know this because if you're not using it, the best information you can come to make your case to Salesforce is say, hey, I have detailed usage information that says I'm not using this. So I'm not going to pay for what I'm not using. That is the most, as the heaviest and best evidence you can bring to your Salesforce rep. They will bring it to the business desk. You will get much better negotiation results. I'm not going to promise you're going to get everything. Everybody's situation is different, but that's the best thing you can bring to the table in terms of leverage that is not a net new purchase, which I'll get into a second. Again, I mentioned Salesforce is going to say your future is golden. You're going to grow. You're going to do great. You're going to have so much more need. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. You should be the one who decides that. You should be the one that comes to that decision. Another problem people make is they got no plan B. They have no plan in case Salesforce comes back and says, we've decided to raise you to list price. You're paying full price. This is your offer. Take it or leave it. You try to negotiate. They say, no, this can happen to you. You should have a plan B. Now, that plan B could be anything from migrate to a different CRM to making a net new purchase, but you should have a plan B in case you get stonewalled. And when I say that, I want to make sure you specifically say here, don't bluff Salesforce. It won't work. They know what someone who looks like, they know exactly what your potential is to migrate. They know how much time work you've put into it. They know what your usage is. They have a very good idea of what you can pay. They know the pressures you as a person are under to get this contract done because they're talking to different people at your organization. So don't try to bluff them. They will know, and they won't be impressed. Another big one, missing terms and conditions you actually negotiated for last time. So just because you negotiated this super key important term in your original contract, many times it will just disappear from your renewal contract. And you'll just think that that was included because you didn't read it. So if you got terms and conditions or anything else that you needed at that original time when you signed, sure it's in your renewal. Don't ignore changes to the MSAs. So Salesforce puts them on their website. They're not substantial changes year to year, but hey, if you signed a 5-year contract, maybe there's something different that you don't like. I'm not your legal team. I'm not a lawyer, but we have definitely talked to organizations where a material change was made in the MSA and they had a big problem. And it usually is a situation where it's not like they didn't sign because of it. They just had to get special terms and conditions around their new renewal. Not knowing or having your leverage, one of the worst things you can do. So leverage is pretty simple in a Salesforce negotiation. It's about purchasing net new. If you are buying a new product, especially one that Salesforce is promoting. So for example, you're buying MuleSoft. Salesforce would love to sell you MuleSoft. They have higher rewards internally for it or Slack versus if you're buying Pardot, which is not on their hot ticket item anymore. So one of the best ways to get leverage is look at your other spend in your other IT areas, your the marketing areas, and say, could I, instead of spending money on this standalone product, instead, could I now use Salesforce for that? And now I'm spending more. Now I'm getting something out of Salesforce that I wanted that they didn't want to give me, some sort of better deal, some sort of condition they didn't want to give me before. Price protection is one of the most common ones. So that's something that you want to think about. Could I have leverage? Do I have leverage that I don't even know I have? Like I said, net new purchase is of the wrong product is a big problem. We see people who buy Partner Cloud and really should have bought Community Cloud and vice versa because they didn't really understand the difference. Salesforce is not going to care generally if you purchase the wrong one. They'll recommend you purchase the other one and own both and try them both out. So that's a big problem. You can switch sometimes at renewals, but again, only at renewal and only typically if you have a net new purchase to go along with it. One of the reasons I said at the beginning is don't wait too long is Salesforce will, if Salesforce catches wind you're serious about your renewal, they are going to try to rush you. They are going to show up 6 to 3 months early, especially if it's in the prior fiscal year, which is January 31st, is when theirs is. And they will say, hey, if you renew early, we got a great deal for you. Well, that's Salesforce looking to get you to renew before you get your act together. And they'll know that you're getting your act together. So you start 6 months out because 9 months out or 6 months out, you start a year out because around 6 to 9 months out, they're going to come to you earlier than you're ready with a seemingly great deal. And you're going to be pressured to sign it before you really know what's going on. And that happens for a lot of companies because they don't have a software asset management policy. That's a big thing that involves many components. But the number one thing it involves with is who is allowed to talk to the vendor. Salesforce will call everyone and anyone in your organization who they think has influence over Salesforce. Have conversations with them, get to know them personally. So you may be a team that's doing the renewal thinking that you're running the show. Meanwhile, Salesforce is talking to 5 people in other departments who have all the inside information. And every minute of your meetings is basically being leaked to Salesforce. So again, software asset management policies are incredibly important. So with that, that ends my part of my presentation. I will look in the Q&A to see if you have any questions. I'm going to give it a minute here if you have any questions. After this event is over, I'm going to send you a couple of things. I'm going to send you my Salesforce licensing guide. I'm going to send you a link to the recording of this webinar. And I am going to see if you need any help with your Salesforce stuff. So it doesn't look like we have any questions for today's presentation. I might have gotten a few in the email. I certainly will send out the answers to those. So again, I want to thank everybody for coming. I know we went a few minutes over. If you need any assistance with your Salesforce licensing, renewals, contracts, or any of the other vendors I showed you, Oracle, Microsoft, Adobe, I didn't mention Adobe, Oracle, Microsoft, IBM, Adobe actually, and AWS as well. We can save you money on your AWS. But that is it. Thank you for coming. I am glad you made it. Have a great day, and I'll see you at the next webinar.